What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Duality, an English unit, with me, Señor Kozak. So even though the introduction that I prepared for this video 4 months ago is now the deadest of dead memes, we're gonna watch it anyway because I spent 6 hours on this video. So anyway, here we go. All right, hope you enjoyed that. So today's going to be a pretty quick video. I hope we're just going to look at a couple of early psychologists and philosophers that looked at the concept of the nature of human duality. A lot of the previous videos have looked at light and dark and masculine and feminine and opposites, but today we're specifically talking about the duality of human nature as represented by good and evil. Now, whether human beings are innately good or evil is a question that has been around for a long time. Islam, Judaism, Christianity, the three major monotheistic religions have all looked at this concept for thousands of years or however long they've been around. So, what do you think? Do you think human beings are innately evil or good? Do you think that when a little baby is born, it's destined to be good and things like society corrupted? Or do you believe that humans are not that great and it requires strong social forces to keep them in check so they don't do things like this? So the first philosopher we're going to look at today is this mustachioed man named Nietzsche. That is how you pronounce his name. One of the goals on my bucket list in life was to be able to spell his name correctly without looking it up. I have managed it twice in my entire life, so I feel pretty good about that. One of the things that made him extremely fascinating was that he suffered from quite a few different both mental and physical illnesses. And as a result, he couldn't write as much as he wanted, so he spent a lot of time thinking. As a result of that, when he wrote, each line had a huge amount of thought behind it because he'd spent so much time thinking. When it came time to finally write stuff, he didn't have a lot of mental or physical energy to be able to do it. This is the reason I think that Nietzsche is one of the most quoted philosophers, because each sentence is a beautiful quote with huge amounts of thought behind it. It almost feels like every sentence he ever wrote was an amazing quote. Nietzsche was one of those people who leaned towards the idea that man was not good. He was evil inherently. Now, I want to clarify that Nietzsche didn't believe that man was all evil, but he definitely leaned towards the idea that man was actually evil and not good. And Nietzsche said, in the last analysis, even the best man is evil. In the last analysis, even the best woman is bad. So Nietzsche had a fairly negative view of human nature. If you'd like to learn more about Nietzsche and how he believed we could overcome this, a card will appear on the top corner. Definitely check out the video by Academy of Ideas. If I could summarize all of Nietzsche's philosophy into a single sentence, it was sort of like how to become your best self, how to overcome that evil nature. And Nietzsche had a lot to teach us about that concept, so definitely check out the video. So the next guy we're going to look at is a guy we've talked about probably too much at this point throughout the course, is a guy named Carl Jung. So this Swiss psychologist had many things to say about the duality of human nature, but ultimately, like Nietzsche, he leaned more towards the idea that humans were inherently evil and not inherently good. He said, unfortunately, there is no doubt about the fact that man is, as a whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. What I really enjoy about this quote is that Jung implies a blindness to our own evil. And that's something we're really going to look at, not next lesson, but the lesson after, when we explore Jung's concept of shadow and persona. So Jung believed that in part humans were divided between persona and shadow within one's psyche. Jung felt very strongly that our shadows, which are traits that we possess that we don't want others to see, which we therefore sort of hide or repress, is unconscious and we are blind to it unless we make it conscious with great effort and self-analysis. That idea comes through in this quote here, that he believed that not only were humans evil, but that we trick ourselves into thinking we're good. Thus, he says that we are less good than we would like to think that we are, ultimately. So we're going back in time a little bit here with our next dude. We're going to talk about this guy whose name is Rousseau. He was born in a place called Geneva, which at the time I think was its own country or republic, but now is a city in Switzerland. Rousseau said that people in their natural state are basically good, but this natural innocence, however, is corrupted by the evils of society. So Rousseau believed that we are inherently good as human beings, but that it is the corruption of society. So modern thinking would believe that it's things like capitalism or racism, sexism. These are the things that take good people and corrupt them to be evil. What's truly interesting about Rousseau is that it is in part because of his philosophy that we have a political divide in the West, specifically in Canada, where I'm from, and in America between conservative and liberal, or left and right. Because what many people don't know is that there's actually a disagreement, a fundamental disagreement between left and right on this idea. Rousseau and his thoughts are some of the founding thoughts of the left-wing side of the political spectrum. Many people aren't consciously aware of this, but if you take a political science course, for example, it becomes very apparent very quickly that this is true. Liberals tend to believe that human beings like Rousseau are inherently good, and it's actually society that corrupts individuals. Whereas the right side of the spectrum believes that human beings are inherently evil and that we have to correct for that. This is one of the reasons it is so difficult, if not impossible, for the left and right to agree on anything, because at the very, very foundation, and we could argue at this point in time subconsciously, there is a disagreement about the fundamental nature of humanity. So how do you get anything done if the very bases are misaligned in terms of philosophy? So from Rousseau, we actually interestingly get a duality of politics as well. Now, unlike Rousseau, both Jung and Nietzsche did believe that there was a split between good and evil in human beings, but as I said, they leaned more towards the idea that we were evil. However, most cultures and philosophers tend to believe that there is I don't want to say 50-50, but a pretty divided split between both good and evil. So one of the people that believed this very strongly was a guy named Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I just finished reading his book, The Gulag Archipelago. It is a tremendously terrifying book, and if you want to lose all faith in humanity, go ahead and read that book. Despite that, however, Solzhenitsyn didn't believe that human beings were inherently evil, nor did he believe they were inherently good, because in his book, he states that the battle line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man. What I love about this quote is not only does he suggest that we are both good and evil, but as the second word in the quote tells us, he believes it's a battle. Now, Solzhenitsyn lived 8 years through the Russian gulags. If you don't know what those are, take a second and click on the card up here. The gulags managed to kill upwards of 30 million people through starvation and hard work. The average life expectancy once you arrived in the gulag was I believe it was about 8 months, but I might be wrong on that statistic. It was certainly less than a year. So having lived through these, Solzhenitsyn not only saw the darkest, most evil, vindictive side of humanity, but within the camps, he also saw what that brought out in people, both good and evil. After living through such horrendous evil and dark times, it is amazing to me that he did not conclude that humans were evil, but rather there is a battle raging in the heart of every man between good and evil. And our final quote today exemplifies this even further. This quote comes courtesy of our novel study that we're going to start in about 3 videos, something like that. I'm still planning this out. I don't know exactly where it's going to be. Anyways, we're going to read the novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. If you don't know what happens in that book, I don't want to spoil it for you because I recently taught this book in my class and I was surprised to find out that many people didn't know the twist at the end of the book. So I'm not going to spoil it here. However, this book definitely explores the idea of the duality of human nature. In that book, Dr. Henry Jekyll, one of the main characters, says the following: I learned to recognize the thorough and primitive duality of man. I saw that of the two natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both. If you don't understand this quote, because it's written in Victorian English, it's a little bit old, ultimately what Henry Jekyll is saying here is that he believed that there was a duality of good and evil, of primitiveness and of modern civilizedness. He was a Victorian gentleman, so he sort of struggled with human nature and this very prim, proper, upright Victorian gentleman expectation that he had to live being a wealthy scientist. He recognized that if he could be said to be either of those things, whether it be a Victorian gentleman or a sort of a primitive human, the only reason he could be said to be one of those is because he was actually both. And it wasn't just that he was both, he was radically both. So the last thing we're going to talk about today before we get on to the homework is actually not a quote, but a story. Now, I have looked into the veracity of this quote and where it came from, and it's hard to identify. It's been attributed to a Cherokee elder, but I can't find any evidence that that's actually the case. That being said, regardless of its source, it's actually perfect for our unit. So the story goes as follows. A Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he says to the boy. It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, and ego. He continued. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person, too. The grandson thought and then asked his grandfather, which one will win? The old Cherokee simply smiled and said, the one that you feed the most. Now, this story is the one that most clearly articulates my feelings on the idea of duality. I believe that good and evil are a choice, that we have the choice to be evil and we have the choice to be good. And regardless of which way humanity leans as a whole, ultimately it is your decision whether you choose to be good or evil. Now, there's a couple other things I want to go through really quickly. On my Instagram page, like I mentioned earlier, there's a really cool statue I talk about. It is a statue of Mephistopheles and Margareta. There's a link in the description to a page that talks about these. And what I really like about this statue is that the statue, while two-sided, is also a duality because it represents masculine and feminine, good and evil, chaos and order, light and dark, all the things we've been talking about in a single statue carved out of a single piece of wood. So check it out, check out the article, check out my Instagram page. It's super cool. All right, as for your homework. So you actually have quite a bit of homework in this episode. If you're a teacher who's using this series in your class, the next thing you should be doing is watching The Dark Knight. Dark Knight is very long. It'll take you about 2 or 3 classes to watch. It's 3 hours long. If you're a student, definitely you need to watch that for homework and pay attention to the concept of duality within the film because it is everywhere. The director, Christopher Nolan, who if you haven't figured it out yet is my favorite director, explores the duality of human nature very effectively here. And he explores the duality on a human level, on a societal level, and in oppositional forces such as good and evil, order and chaos. Now, traditionally what I do every time I watch this film is I get students to write me an essay on the film. And the prompt I ask them to write on is this: explore the concept of duality in the film The Dark Knight. If you don't know how to write an essay yet, a card will appear in the top corner in a second. That is a link to my video on how to write an essay. It's a little bit outdated. I'm gotten a lot better at editing videos since then, but there's some good information in there. I'll go back and make a new video soon, but have some patience there. 2 major pieces of homework. Number 1, watch The Dark Knight. Number 2, write an essay exploring the concept of duality in The Dark Knight. The next video that I make is going to be my essay. It'll be a video essay, obviously, not a written essay, but it will be my essay answering that prompt. After that video, I am going to go through and discuss Jung's concept of persona and shadow as it applies to Harvey Dent and, as a result, all of us. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. I know it was mostly just a series of quotes, but the idea of this video is to give you some stuff that you could go and look up on your own and study more about it, and hopefully it kind of did that. Anyway, guys, I'm Señor Kozak. Thanks for stopping by. Love you guys. Appreciate all of the patronage. Make sure to smash like, smash subscribe, smash the bell, smash your computer, smash your homework, and see you later. Peace.